In this lesson, you will learn the fundamentals of reading a musical score. A piece of music in the classical music tradition is called a score. You will also find it called sheet music, partitura, that's Spanish, or perhaps a manuscript. Other common terms for sheet music such as song, chart, or standard are used in other genres of music like folk, pop, or jazz. At the top of your score, on the first page, you will find most of the pertinent information such as title, subtitle, composer, editor, arranger, and publication details. If you find a set of dates next to the composer's name, it will be indicating their date of birth, and if they're not still alive, their death. This can be useful to understand when the composer lived, and therefore what period and style of music they composed in. A music staff, or stave as it's called in the UK, consists of horizontal lines and spaces that denote different pitches. For the classical guitar, we have 5 horizontal lines and 4 spaces within those lines. Note heads are placed either on a line or in a space. As notes move up the staff, their pitch will be higher, and as they move down, their pitch will be lower. Because the range of the classical guitar is greater than can be represented with the 5 lines of the musical staff, extra lines are drawn to accommodate higher and lower notes. These are called ledger lines and follow the same use of lines and spaces. The musical alphabet goes from A to G. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There is no H note in the musical language. Rather, when the cycle of notes from A to G is completed, it simply starts again. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then it just repeats A, B, C, D, and so on. Or if the notes are descending, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, and then A, G, F, E, D, and so on. The staff helps us navigate the musical alphabet in a very logical way. Each line and space represents a single pitch from the musical alphabet. If you move up to the next line or space, you will have moved up one note in the musical alphabet, from A to B, for example. If you move down one line or space, you will have moved down one pitch in the musical alphabet, from A to G, for example. The simple logic of the music staff is easy to use, but it's missing one important thing: a starting point. Different clefs are used on the score to provide different starting points for the musical alphabet. For the classical guitar, we use the treble clef. Used for the majority of instruments, this clef is also known as the G clef. It is so named because the symbol centers around the second line from the bottom, which will be the note G. This then provides a starting point for all other notes around it. One peculiarity to the classical guitar is that the notes written in classical guitar music actually sound 1 octave lower than they normally would on the treble clef. This does not affect your reading of the notation, but it will explain why, if you play the same note on the staff as a violinist, they will sound an octave apart. The technically correct clef for the classical guitar has a small 8 written below the clef, indicating that the pitch is an octave lower. However, it's often left out. A single staff can only hold so much music. As it flows down the page from left to right and top to bottom, we need another term to communicate what line of music we're on. This term is system. Just as you might refer to a line in a book of text, we refer to systems in a musical score. A system can have a single staff, as it often does in classical music that's for a solo instrumentalist, but it can also refer to a group of instruments using multiple staffs in ensemble scores. The horizontal lines and spaces of a staff communicate pitch, but they don't tell us anything about rhythm. Rhythm is communicated with different note values that can be differentiated by the note heads, stems, and ties. Note heads can be either hollow or filled in. They'll be placed either on a line or in a space on the staff to communicate pitch. The duration of a note will be communicated by the note head being hollow or filled in with or without a dot, and also the type of stem that is attached or absent from the note head. The direction of stems will change depending on the location of the note head. Notes above the middle line will often have downward stems, and those below will have upward stems. This is largely for practical space-saving reasons on the score. As musical textures get more complex, you will find that directions might depend on what notes relate to each other for melody, bass, and accompaniment. Here we have the upper melody with all of the stems facing up, and the bass with the stems facing down. Having note durations on a score are not that useful until they're organized and grouped together. That's where time signatures and measures come into play. Time signatures are found at the beginnings of pieces. They can also change at different points in the music as it progresses. They help us group rhythms together, and they can communicate a musical feel or dance, such as a waltz, march, jig, or even a mazurka. A time signature usually comprises of two numbers stacked on top of each other. The top number tells us how many beats are in each measure, and the bottom number tells us what kind of beat it is. This will be further explained later in the course. A measure, or bar as it is sometimes called, helps us group rhythms together into understandable chunks. The rhythmic capacity of a measure is defined by the time signature, and once it's full, we use a measure line to denote the start of another measure. Repetition is common in music, and instead of rewriting a passage that is repeated, we can simply use repeat signs in place of normal measure lines. Once we arrive at a repeat sign, we return back to the beginning, play the music once again, and then continue on. If, however, there is a forward-facing repeat sign, then we arrive at our backward-facing repeat sign, and we return to the forward-facing repeat sign, repeat the music, and then continue on. Tablature, or tab, offers a simple and quick way to communicate where a note or group of notes is to be played on the guitar. At its core, tab tells you what string to play and which fret to hold down. You can get quite a long way with these two simple instructions, and that's why tab is such a popular way to learn guitar music. Tab has 6 horizontal lines. Each one represents a string on the guitar. The top line represents string number 1, E, and the bottom is number 6, low E. When there is a number on that line, it means to play the note at the corresponding fret number. For example, if there is a 1 on the second line from the top, it means to play the first fret on the second string. If there are numbers stacked on top of each other, over different strings, it means you have to hold down all those notes and play a chord. The letters P, I, M, and A are used on the score to communicate right-hand fingerings. The letter P refers to the thumb and is from the Spanish word for thumb, pulgar. The letter I refers to the index finger and comes from the Spanish word for index finger, índice. The letter M refers to the middle finger and comes from the Spanish word medio. And finally, the letter A refers to the ring finger, and comes from the Spanish word for ring, anular. There is a letter for the little finger, although you're not going to find it very often in classical guitar music because it's seldom used. That letter is C for chico, which translates to little finger. These letters can be found individually or stacked together. They are placed as close as possible to the note they are referring to and can be found above or below the staff depending on what offers the clearest instruction. In the early stages of learning, you will find a lot of right-hand fingerings to help you develop good habits and support reading fluency. As you progress past the beginning stages, however, you will notice that there's less and less right-hand fingering on the score. This happens for a number of reasons. The fingering is deemed obvious by the editor and is unnecessary to be written out on the score, or there are multiple approaches to the fingering and the editor doesn't want to dictate each choice. It can also be to keep a score uncluttered by removing text that isn't absolutely necessary. And finally, in an educational setting, you also might find that someone leaves out fingering so that you are forced to think about it. On the score, you will find the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 used to communicate left-hand fingerings. The number 1 refers to the index finger, the number 2, the middle finger, number 3, the ring finger, and number 4 refers to the little finger. Just as with right-hand fingering, you will find the numbers placed as close as possible to the note head so as to be clear with fingering instruction. These numbers can be in isolation for an individual note or stacked next to a chord. Sometimes their placement can be moved around by other objects on the score, like sharps or flats, and this makes their placement a little less consistent. The numbers can be found to the left or right of a note head, and even above or below. Similar to right-hand fingering, you'll find an abundance of fingering in beginner materials and less in advancing repertoire. Overall, however, you will encounter more left-hand fingering than right, because the solutions are less obvious. As you progress in your studies, you'll find that left-hand fingering becomes integral to learning and interpreting repertoire. Advanced players will often seek out fingering solutions to pieces or passages from master players to discover how they made technical and musical choices. If you love puzzles, you might find that you enjoy the challenge of left-hand fingering. Numbers found in circles are referring to a specific string on the guitar. With the standard guitar, we have 6 strings, and therefore you will find the numbers 1 through 6 in circles on the score. Because there are several places to play a single pitch on the guitar, sometimes as many as 4 practical locations to choose from, it can be helpful for the editor or composer to specify what string is to be used. Using the string number in conjunction with the left-hand fingering offers a good deal of information as to where and how to place your fingers. To help communicate where on the fingerboard a passage of music is to be played, we can use positions. A position is determined by where your first finger falls on the fingerboard. First position, for example, is when you use your first finger for notes on the first fret. In this position, you will generally find that your second finger plays the second fret, the third finger plays the third fret, and the fourth finger plays the fourth fret. This is called the 1 finger per fret rule. If we are to translate this up 1 fret, then your first finger would be playing the second fret, the second finger plays the third fret, and so on. This would be second position. If you translate all of this up again to the 5th fret, you would be playing in 5th position. It's that simple. While using 1 finger per fret can be quite consistent with simple melodies, this rule is quickly broken as soon as we start playing more than 1 note at a time. It can be a bit of a sticking point for beginners when fingering moves away from this 1 finger per fret rule, so it's good to acknowledge that these positions simply communicate an area of the fingerboard in which to play rather than which fingers to use. Positions are also rarely static, as the left hand moves constantly up and down the fingerboard. Once again, more of a communication tool than a playing tool. So in summary, in this lesson, we've learned about the score, the staff and the musical alphabet, the treble clef, systems, note heads and stems, time signatures and measures, repeats, right-hand fingering, left-hand fingering, string numbers, tablature, and position playing. We've covered a lot of ground in this lesson, and you're now ready to read the music in the upcoming exercises and examples. As new concepts are introduced, make sure you give yourself time to put them into practice, and feel free to revisit this lesson should you need to revise anything.